Durban, KwaZulu-Natal has been the hardest.
Welcome back to the show, and it's definitely been a really important, should we say, educational version of chatting to David about the type of situations that kids face and the child protection line really making differences in people's lives. And I think that's what it's about. We need to actually take note of that, and possibly the schools and the principals should actually take note to want to actually put it into that curriculum to make it a part of that education so people know that there is a support structure in place. And now we have a different version of a support structure which reaches out through stories. And I think it's so important. A lot of the times we forget that narratives actually get us into thinking about the types of situations we're in, and sometimes even through a fun way. Now, let me tell you about my two guests this morning. On the line, I have with me Shahista Thokan. She's an absolutely wonderful individual, always had an immense passion for wanting to give back to communities and people. Shasta is a woman with great diversity. She's passionate about contributing towards people from all sorts of walks of life and in increasing their quality of life as well, and wanting to make that positive impact. And then Shaakira she's a marketing strategist, entrepreneur, and published author. Professionally, she thrives on supplementing her BCom marketing background, but she's also an enthusiast and has a taste for life and does that through her writing skills. So we're going to be talking to them this morning and getting some insight into the book, A Taxi Through Mzansi, a collection of diverse, proudly South African stories contributed by 20 writers. And that's very interesting. Let me just, before we go into that, there's their picture up there. As you can see, it's a very exciting front cover. It gets you thinking about the typical Mzansi kind of life that we have. And they also have Media Inc. It's a multi-talented media and publishing house aiming to showcase extraordinary South African talented people. And each project is managed to produce lasting financial, cultural value through their hands-on commitment and service excellence, which I think is important. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Thank you so much for joining me on today's mid-morning show.
Walaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. So good to be here, Nafisa.
I'm very excited to get this bumper pack edition of what we have in line on this particular reason for you wanting to have this book out there. Shaakira, from your side, I know you've been avidly involved in this, and there's always a different take on it. So I'm also excited to want to chat to you about that angle that you decided on. So Shasta, let's start with you. Let's talk a little bit about yourself, and then, of course, the inception of 20 amazing writers on A Taxi Through Mzansi. And as we know, of course, they're first-time writers, and you've given them the platform to able to, should we say, showcase the different types of diversity in Mzansi itself.
So really speaking, when we came up with the idea, it was stemmed from us being inspired by ourselves last year as COVID writers. A lot of us had abundance of time, and through this time, we decided to pen our thoughts. And that got published into a book, and it was my very first anthology that I was part of. And I said to myself this year, I would give the same positivity back and, pass that torch on. So our call for submission was for first-time writers, but alhamdulillah, we've managed to get some established writers in the anthology as well. And it was just about their story of being South African, and during this time of what it is like to be, in this diverse country with so many challenges, with so many wonderful tales also of their upbringing and what they bring to the table in terms of being South African. So that was actually the idea behind the anthology, and what started off as an idea just catapulted to something so phenomenal. I'm just so excited.
That sounds very interesting. Shakira, from your side, I think having read a bit of your pieces and looking at the type of person you are, it's so nice to see that everything that the two of you do always has a purpose behind it, but it also has a narrative and, should we say, a message at the end that gives you some good food for thought. How did you go about choosing these 20 writers that you went and decided to actually accept into this book?
Thanks, Nafisa. And it's so true. When you have a joint purpose and an aligned goal, it just makes things so much easier and it flows. And you see the collaboration, not just between Shahista and myself, but with the other parties involved, including our editors and our designers and our layout artists. This was a lovely opportunity to bring creative minds together, to bring powerful minds, 20 authors. And I'm so glad you asked that question because it was quite a process to ensure that the brief was met. If you look on our social media pages, we sent out a call describing the light-hearted Mzansi stories we were looking for. And everyone that is South African has a truly Mzansi story. So everyone who met that brief, we went through all the submissions and we selected the 20 and we worked with them with our editor and we enhanced the stories wherever we could and we tried to bring out the true South African flavor. So it was quite a grueling process, as you can imagine, Nafisa, but we're quite pleased with the end. And if you look at the book, the cover itself, it just encapsulates that South African vibe, with all our sayings, the houses and the yebo and the now. So yeah, it was quite a process, but a very rewarding one.
And now that you're talking about the cover, the very first time that Ponty sent me this picture, I couldn't stop smiling because it's so relative. It's something you relate to. The minute you see a taxi, it's something you relate to, and it brings back many stories and diversity, should we say, when you look at a taxi. So I think that front cover alone just says too much. I was actually very excited to get my hands on this particular book and wanting to read everybody's take on what Mzansi means for them. Shasta, what would you say is the key idea to getting people to, like these particular writers involved, to talk about their stories? And I'll tell you why. Reason being, many a times these stories entice people in many different directions, and that's what it's about. It could be taken from a fun angle, but there's always an important message behind it.
So I think the theme that stood out for us was the fact that it had to be the essence of their own identity as a South African. That was the first. And the second was the message that portrayed from their story had to be one that left us feeling good and a positive, reflection of the book. And that was very important because of the current consequences around the world, around the country, during the COVID. We needed something uplifting, something happy, something to leave readers with a positive image, of course, of South Africa. So when people chose to write either fiction or non-fiction of their particular story through the eyes of either themselves, a family member, a friend, or even something they overheard, that was really accepted by us because we could see that the voice, like we could actually hear the voice through the story, if I could say that. It was really personal. There was a lot of graphic detail, and those are the stories and the submissions that stood out to us. If people got the flavor of what we were looking for. And I think, Taxi Through Mzansi, and I mentioned this to you, Nafisa, for me, local authors, local individuals even, just sitting at home, we all have stories to tell. And we're just so intimidated to pen it because of the title of author and, all these grammatical and English things and punctuations that come with it. So for us, it was taking them and holding their hand through the process of, you do have a good story. Now let me fine tune it. And through Shaakira and my experience working with lots of people through our networks, we wanted these original voices to come through, and we just refined it as publishers. So for us, it was very easy. Theirs was the harder task of giving us a piece of themselves and their story.
I think I agree with you there. It's having to tap into that, but I think there's a lot of essence to it. To those stories, because as you say, each one, there could be even a challenge that a person wrote about, but it's how they overcame it. And by just reading that little piece, it could entice you to say that if that person overcame that, so can I. Shakira, let's get back to you now. You know what? The interesting thing I'm waiting to get my hands on, like I said, was the book. But It's a pity we didn't get to do that. But give us a little bit of an idea of what to expect from reading this book. What is in there? What can you entice us with? Because I think the picture alone got many people going in our studio when we got to see the picture before we went on air. So we wanted to get a little bit of a take on it, a little bit of that spice and that enticement to say, get your hands on it.
Yes. Nafisa, we're going to keep you waiting for the actual book in your hands until the 5th, but we promise you will have it. But just to whet your appetite right now, I can most certainly share with you some insight into what you can expect. So
sure.
If I can compare it to, if you travel, if you go to a foreign country, you could go to the touristy sites and see, if you talk about South Africa, you talk about Table Mountain, or you talk about Durban, and it's beautiful. Okay, but if you really want to experience the country truly, you will go into the townships, into the ghettos, you will live the lives of the inhabitants of the country. And that's the essence we wanted to bring out. So there are many different viewpoints in there. Some stories take part on the coast, and some stories take part in the townships, which, we can all relate to. And I think it's very important to mention from the onset, if we wanted to capture every viewpoint in South Africa, we would be fooling ourselves in one anthology. So, from these 20 stories, they are so diverse, but there's still so much work to do, Nafisa, in capturing more. And from the feedback and from the positive, like everyone that's been saying, we want to submit, and it's been beyond the deadline. This is the first anthology with many different viewpoints from around the country. I'm talking about the essence of the inhabitants from a first person view, not from a person narrating it as a third person. So you're going to get that raw and that very real insight. As a South African, you'll identify with it. As someone that's not from South Africa also, I think it's so interesting to appreciate the diversity. And that is truly what makes this book magical. And while I say this, I just want to add that if anyone listening to this and is inspired by it and has that Mzansi story within it and feels like, gosh, I missed out, this was the book for me, that is my story. I hope and pray that inshallah there will be a second volume, because given that everybody needs to tell their own story, and there's definitely scope for it.
I really am enjoying this, because I'll tell you why. For me, when I look at this, I see a sync. So it's creating that indirectly from those stories and those narratives, making us, should we say, understand each other through culture, diversity, as you were saying, and the types of versions of lives that we have. And you were talking about the townships. It's nice to read those little stories, because it kind of gives us a better idea and inclination of the types of challenges people face in those areas and what it is that we as South Africans can do. But I think what this book also represents is the word Ubuntu.
Definitely.
Yeah, so it's basically
just touching on that point, Nafisa, of when you mentioned the townships, it was a pity that our call went out around May and June, and then the riots happened post that period of time. So really, as Shaakira mentioned, we would love to do a second volume where people from the areas that were affected and more people in terms of reaching out on a further audience to give their personal stories to us would be appreciated, because that's a whole volume by itself, is how people have really overcome that particular obstacle and challenge, not only as business people, but individuals in homes with job losses and just being really challenged in that time and infuriated, but also their resilience that came from it. I mean, look at where we are now. Alhamdulillah, we have rebuilt, I think. So that township chapter and story is yet to come. I think it's something to look forward to. And then the Ubuntu aspect of it, yes, we've had several people reach out to write the stories, and then through the period of time, of course, we had to select those that fit the brief and the narrative of this particular anthology, not to discard the others, and hopefully to include more of the Ubuntu, more of diversity, more different types of stories. And yes, I think this is not the end. This is the start of that taxi's journey, and we hope to take it much further than this.
Now, I agree, Shaakira, that taxi is definitely going to cause a stir. I'll tell you why. I see your deeper vision in the sense that that taxi is going to be bringing many people from all walks of life together through the narratives. And I think that's what it's about. It's about bringing people together through narrative, which I think in many instances gets forgotten, where we don't realize the importance of narrative.
Most certainly, Nafisa, and I think what's also beautiful, besides the diversity in, the culture of South Africa, if you look at the author bios on our social media pages, they are so diverse in age and background. There's some professionals there, there's some humanitarians, there's some youth, who's written for the first time. This is their pilot
Yeah.
project. And how empowering is that to know that, this could be the start of so much more. So it's that diversity as well, and it's that standpoint in terms of the history of South Africa. There are some political stories. There are some, in terms of there is apartheid. From whoever's perspective, how far back you go, and then there is the new South Africa now. And what I enjoy, as Shahista says, the resilient South African show. Right now, I'm trying to avoid Eskom issues with power, and I've made a plan, right, on the plan gemaakt. But I think it's also the humor you find in it. We deal with things in a very light way, and we come through at the end. So that's the lightness that I hope that readers find from this book. That although there can be hardship and although there can be struggle, and but there is triumph at the end of the day. And I love the outlook South Africans have when dealing with things. It's always like I just feel light when I think about it, and that's the feeling we want.
Word is adaptable.
Yes, we have to be.
You saying adaptable, Shahista, and I agree totally. But it's also about support structure. Besides COVID-19 and this particular anthology you've written, I think it has taught us that we have South Africans are giving people, and it has taught us in many directions that we as South Africans can take our differences, put it aside, come together and create those support structures for each other. And I think that's what it's about.
Oh, definitely. We've seen it when communities have turned into law enforcement to protect their neighbors. And we're living in areas where we are living amongst such diverse cultures and religions. And yet, at the time of crisis, we really drew together. And I think that's the beauty here is we've passed all that. We really have. The generation that we're looking at that are something to admire is the fact that we are able to draw together, to unite on the common purpose and cause of making this our home. Immigration is not an option for a lot of us. So South Africa is our home. And in order to protect and preserve it, maybe for the next generation, we've got to put our differences aside. And I think that's really, really an important aspect.
Mm-hmm. Would you say, Shaakira, this narrative will make people understand the diversity and the culture and bringing people together through that? Because many a times I think there's a lot of misconceptions from community to community and, should we say, culture to culture. So this should kind of alleviate it in some way, where people start understanding each other's cultures better and start respecting that and starting, creating a uniformity in some way.
I 100% agree, Nafisa. I think that if I think from your standpoint or you think from my standpoint, and if we put our prejudices aside through the narrative, there's a story to be told, and you can come to a point where you say, I haven't thought about it that way. I'll give you a typical example. If, for example, if my son is a cricket player and he gets to the stadium on time today, but if there's a little boy that lives far away from, the cricket stadium, he doesn't start the way, for example, if my son is in a point of privilege, and if this little boy is not, he comes from a township, what time did he have to get up? He had to take a taxi. Did he even have breakfast? At what mindset is he in? Did he have to face any dangers with crime? What have you? And then if he's late and the cricket coach says, but why are you always late? And he gets angry with him. But he's seeing the backstory there, that we all don't start from the same point. And I think we need to understand each other's journeys, So So it definitely, the narrative gives you insight into people's lives, into their lived experiences, and I think it just opens up our minds and makes us less judgmental and less quick to just pass on that first thought. So I think it's a healing process for those that wrote, and it was quite interesting to read. And some things you just look at it at face value, but when you read deeper, you have a greater
Yeah.
appreciation for the reality.
That is so true, and I'm sure Shaita, you'll agree with me. It's nice to see women like yourselves that have been players. We're gonna call ourselves key players because each one of us has served some purpose with, especially now during COVID-19, to be able to give a bit of ourselves back to the communities, to be able to empower and uplift in some way. And would we say that a taxi through Mzansi is going to do that in some way too, where it's going to entice us to think about the types of situations through the narratives that we can move forward in some way?
I think it was a very cathartic process. And as you said, when we are team players, I say to Shaakira all the time, she's the yin to my yang, because we're very, very different personalities. And also we offer very different, things to the table. We bring
Sure.
different things to the table. And then this particular anthology as well, what people will really take from it is the fact that they know these first time writers. I mean, it's this particular one from university. I know the chap that wrote for an anthology. Maybe I should try. I think it gives people a little bit of a motivation and a hope that their stories are not too small, and their voices won't be left unheard if they do have the story. There are always avenues, always channels to get to us and to get their stories published. And I think that is very inspiring for people out there. And that's what we wanted as educators, is to help people to know that there is a way to get what you want in life. There's an opportunity awaiting for you, just by meeting the right people and focusing on the fact that you can do it. It's a very, very individualized process, and I think people should take from that. They should be inspired
Sure.
to really push their talents and submit stories to us.
Wow, I think it's absolutely phenomenal an idea. I want to thank you, ladies, for joining us. But before we wrap up, Shaakira, give us some form of inspiration before we go with regard to Taxi Through Mzansi.
Nafisa, there's so much I can say, but I think that if, like as Shahista said, if you have a story to share, and if nothing is too small, I want to build on that. I want people to be inspired from this book. I think Shahista as well, that instead of a third party, noting, oh, this is South Africa and what I saw, what is your authentic story, your true story, your form of self-expression? I feel like anyone can be a writer. Anyone
True.
can, but do you have the grit to stick through
Okay.
the
We
process
we seem
and
to
to
be running out
tell?
of time. I'm going
Okay,
to interrupt there and quickly ask you to give us some information with regard to your book launch. So everybody that's
sure.
interested in having this, and I'm really reiterating that I think it's important for people to attend this book launch because it's going to
Yes.
give us a little more information to the ideology of creating that Ubuntu. So give us some information quickly with regard to that.
Okay, so the book launch is on the 5th of December, December boss. We are having a good start to the month. It's happening at the Military Museum in Johannesburg, starting at 10 a.m., featuring many of our authors, a light program, a delicious brunch. Please do join us. You can buy tickets on Media Inc.'s Instagram page. Check out the information there. And also, you'll get our numbers there as well. But please do join us. If you want December to start on a letter note, this is the event for you to attend.
And I think a great networking opportunity for people to really come and meet the who's who in publishing, editing, designing, authors, other authors, just to be inspired by like-minded people and other South
Definitely.
Africans who you can draw inspiration from, and hopefully, one day you'll be published. I think that's the ultimate outcome of that launch.
I really want to thank you for joining me. You've really inspired me, and I really look forward to that launch and having, like as I said earlier, to get my hands on that book and then get inspired in many directions. But it's been such a pleasure talking to you two ladies, and I wish you all the best as far as this is concerned. And I'm hoping we can tap into each other real soon. Take care of yourselves. Assalamu
Inshallah.
alaikum wa
Wa
rahmatullahi wa
alaikum
Thank
salam.
you. Thank you, Nafisa. Jazakallah.
Okay, Shaakira, Rahiman, Saleh, and of course Shahista Thokan talking to us about their book, Taxi Through Mzansi. Definitely something to look at. We're going to go for a quick break. Stay with us. We'll be back with you in an instant.